How's it going, guys? Anxious Cynic back again with another Mine-imator tutorial. So as you may have noticed last week in that tutorial, I had a little bit of a particle effect that happened with the slime bounce, and I thought maybe it was time to go into a little bit more in-depth particle tutorial of how you can create your own particle effects with Mine-imator. So let's go ahead and spawn in a particle system, and you have the default spawner or, other ones. As you can see, I've created some that you may have downloaded already if you watched some of my previous tutorials. But we have a lot of these presets, and generally you can use these as a good starting point if you have something similar you want to make. But for us, I think we may actually use one of these. Let's go with the hi-fi fire. Okay, so here's our hi-fi fire effect, and yeah, it's not so bad. What we're going to do is go into the library, and then you have this here where you can select your particle creator, and then you have this option here with open editor. So there's a couple of things about using particles that might be a little bit confusing. I think I covered this in my complete beginner's guide. When you use particles, you get kind of an extra menu for how you deal with them. Most of the time when you open up a character or something, you have this panel here and this panel here, and that's pretty much it. But with the particle creator, if you want to actually adjust what particles you're using, then you have this here, but you also have the open editor. So when you click on that, you're going to get this whole thing here of your particles. So this up here is actually universal. Like, it doesn't matter what you're doing or what you're using, this stays the same. However, you have your types section, and what you do here is the different types of particles that are happening. And obviously, as you can see, you can have more than one, and then there's a ratio between how much each one gets used. So as you can see here, we have the fire particles, which are these like flaming red bits, and then you have the smoke particles, which are the dissipating little smoky bits, and each of those is its own thing with its own settings. So when I click on that, you see that this drops down, and we have all of these great settings for how we can adjust that and whatnot, and vice versa for the smoke. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep this as it is. I'm just going to use this as an example, so there's even more customization you could do yourself. So we're just going to stick with this one for now. So let's start with our fire particles, and just to kind of simplify this, I'm going to take the smoke spawn rate and zero it out, so all we see is the fire for now. That might kind of screw us up a little bit later, but we're going to just go with that for now to kind of simplify this. What I want to do is adjust our fire. So now that we've got it selected, sorry about the wordiness, what we're going to do is change some of these things. So what you have here is your frame width and frame height, and basically what that is adjust. These are really small, you can't hardly see them, but it adjusts how big that square is, I believe. Yeah, okay. So it adjusts how big that square is, and that's, how much will fit into what your particle is going to look like on this particle sheet that we have here. And you have sheet 1 and sheet 2, and of course they change. But anyway, so by default, this has got like two little flame things selected there. And you have a start and end. So this is start frame 48 and end frame 49, meaning it's covering 2 frames. So the fire particle changes from, as you can see, this big one at the base, which is more like a little flame, and then it goes into this little square thing afterwards. But as you can see here, you have this preview, and you can see the 2 different flames particles that is the textures that is gonna use there. So basically what you would do, like if I wanted to change this, I could take this and click and drag, and then I can have it go over these different ones here. And as you can see here, this little preview is playing, and it's playing that over the amount of time we have on the animation speed. So as you can see here, it says start frame 128, end frame 135. Let's see if I can break this down. I feel like I'm kind of rambling and not explaining it very well, so I apologize. In any case, what's happening here is the animation is taking place at 1 frame per second, and it's trying to play all these frames. So 128 to 135, that's what, 7 frames? So the thing is like this frame rate is not fast enough, so you can see there's not much going on here. So if we increase this frame rate, let's just say 15 frames a second, then you can see, that's maybe a little bit too high, but you can see there that it changes, and we can see a little bit more of our particle system. So I'm going to go with about 3 frames per second on that, because I just experimented with it a little bit and found that seems to work. And as you can see, it kind of starts with the little basic shape, and then it goes into the more circular as it goes up. That might be kind of difficult to see, But that's basically how that works. Like you can change the frame because you can make your own custom particle sheets, and some of them may have a higher resolution than the default ones. But for the default one, 8 pixels by 8 pixels is perfectly fine for the size of these items here. So I'm just gonna change this back to that, and as you can see there, it's too fast. So let's bring it back down to 1, and then you get this awesome fire back. So that's kind of a basic rundown of that section, and then you have the on animation end. And basically what this means is when you have these particles that are changing over time, it's just gonna stop moving. But if you choose to loop, then it'll kind of churn back into that and start over as it continues onward. The way this is you can see it's a loop, so it's kind of just going back and forth. If we click stop, it's just gonna go from that one to the other one and then end. And that's it. And to that point, if you notice here, the destroy particles option, when the animation is finished, is ticked. So that means once the animation between all these frames has completed, then that means the particle is going to be destroyed, and that's why you're seeing this happen where the it's not going up very high, which works for the fire. You also have a couple of other options here, which is if amount of particles exceed 300, and you can change this number here. I think by default it's on 200. For this preset it's on 300, and we can untick that, and that's fine. It really depends on, basically with this, when animation is finished ticked, it's pretty much superseding this one, so this one could probably be turned off, and you don't really notice much of an effect. But if we did the other way around, then you might notice more of an effect from that. And then finally, you also have the after a time, or a time after spawn. So that means I can actually turn these off, and as you'll see, the particles just go and go and go, and they're going to be, a lot of them. But we can turn this at a time after spawn, and then we can set the time for how long we want them to last afterwards. And as you can see there, it takes them about a second. We have this on 1 second, so it takes them about a second to get there, and that's when it's going to destroy the particles. And that doesn't look too bad in itself, and you can bring that down, bring it up, and it just depends on what kind of particle you're doing as to which one of these you'll want to use. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it on default for now. And then of course you have your 1500 per minute, the spawn rate. By default, this is usually, I think, around 100 or 200 or something. Let's see, 100. For this preset, we have 1500. And of course, this is always going to change with what you do, like what kind of particle you're wanting to make. So you'll have to play with that to figure it out. Anyway, what you have here, by default, sometimes this thing is not dropped down the speed option, and you really need that in order for certain things to happen. So as you can see here, our particle has ceased to do what it's supposed to be doing since I collapsed that. So this is actually one of the kind of weird things in Mine-imator, where just having this not expanded causes it to not have the effects that are applied under this. So that's kind of odd, it might strike you, but as you can see here, when I drop it down, then we have those options and the effects from them. I've pretty much covered this in previous tutorials, but you have your initial, your add, and your multiply. And I wouldn't presume to understand this 100%, but my basic understanding is, which could be flawed, is your initial is the speed at which your particle is going to go right out of the emitter. Your add is a speed that's going to be added over time to that, and then multiply, I think, is going to multiply both of those values over time or something to that effect. Generally, I just kind of have a basic idea of the add in the initial, and I play with them and with the multiply until I get the effect that I want. So something to note here about how these kinds of things work. If you notice on the axes we have here, these arrows, you have an arrow that points in a particular direction. So I believe yellow is our Y, blue is our X, and red is our Z, I believe. Once again, I have my my Z and Y kind of reversed based on my settings in Mine-imator. So for you, that might be different. In any case, the main thing to take away from this is that the arrows are pointing in a certain direction. So whatever the axis is, so let's say if yellow is our Y and it's pointing this way, so that means Y on the positive, meaning it'll be a positive number to the Y. And if you go away from the arrow, that's negative. So if I want this to move positively on the Y-axis, assuming this yellow one is our Y-axis, then I need this to be a positive number. If I want it to move this way towards the left of our Y-axis, then I need it to be a negative number. If that makes sense, I'm sorry if it doesn't. Okay, so I did a little bit of playing, and the blue is actually our Y and the yellow is our X. I apologize for that confusion. But anyway, so we want this to go positively on the X factor, right? So let's take this and make it go plus 20. And then as you'll see here, it's moving towards the arrow on this side. And if I take it, let's just say, let's make it, if I make it negative 20, you'll see it comes out a little bit further on this side. If I make it negative 50, then you'll see it comes out on this side. So basically these numbers just correspond with the direction in which it's going to go on that axis. This was something that kind of confused me for a while, but I finally got the hang of it. So hopefully that'll help you guys understand what these numbers mean and how they work. And of course you have the time like over a second. So I believe what this is trying to tell you is that it's going to move negative 10 on the x-axis over a period of 10 seconds or something like that. So that's basically what you would do, and you can adjust this. If I take this Z and make it go negative 20, then you'll see here that when it first spawns, it comes down and then it goes up, right? And then you'll see here the add is 0.1 even. So what that means is when it initially spawns, it's going to be going at a rate of negative 20, and then over time it adds 1, so then you get this, it pulls it up. And then you also have multiply Z by 1, so I guess it's going to even multiply that as it goes further. So that's why you have this effect where it comes out and it kind of starts down like a, I guess making it have more of a fire effect, and then it shoots up over time based on these parameters. So that's how all that stuff can kind of be used for you like that. So let's see what happens when we take this and we give it an actual like positive 10. So what you'll see here is that it no longer dips down and it just comes out and goes straight up. So now you have your scale options. One is you can set the scale of the actual particles. Right now it's on 0.5, but if I bring this to 1, you'll see it makes it much bigger. If I make it like say 0.2, it's much smaller and whatnot. And then you have scale change, which is negative 0.25 per second. So what that is it's reducing the scale by a quarter basically over every second that it is existing, and that's why the particles get a little bit smaller as they go up. And you of course can change that and have it go bigger, so over time it becomes bigger. You can have it go even more radically smaller at negative 0.5, and that makes it become smaller, but we're just going to leave that on default for now. And of course you have your alpha. You can make it where it's slightly invisible, and you can randomize all these things. By the way, I haven't really been going into that, but you can randomize it so the scale can be 0.5 between that and 1, so it's kind of random. Certain ones might spawn at 0.5, certain ones might spawn at 1, etc. And you can play with all these with that yourself, kind of figure that out. And then you have the mix gradually. Let's see if we can turn that off and see what happens. So basically what the mix gradually thing is gonna do is it changes the color of the particles over time. And as you can see here, that was kind of the glitch that I think I was noticing in the beginning, where the fire kind of has this squareness around it and whatnot, and I don't really know if I would want that. What if we just want it to be the flames? So I'm going to turn that off, and I have this start and end color, and basically what that means is when it starts it's more yellow, and by the end of the animation I guess it's going to be red color. So let's turn that off, and then as you can see we have just more of the natural colors from the textures themselves. Alright, so as you can see I tried to play with the colors a little bit there, but we're going to change that in a minute. Anyway, the last things you might want to look at when it comes to creating particles is the use spawn region, use bounding box, and bounce factor. All these have to do with some of the settings you have up here. When you set a spawn region, then what you can do is have it actually spawn them in an area rather than just from that little source, and then you can change the shape. You can have it be a cube, you can have it be a box, and then dictate like how big the box is, like resize it and things like that to make it fit shapes and whatnot. And then you have the bounding box, which is what's going to affect how far the particle can go. So for example, if I turn this down, okay, so what I did is I put this at negative 20 over 10 seconds, and I got rid of the add for the plus. Let's make that just negative one there, and as you can see, the particle is now going down and through the ground. So what I can do is enable the ground bounding box, and you'll see that the particles hit that and stop, and they're bouncing actually. And what I can do, like sometimes you'll have schematics and your ground won't be at the 0 position, so you can figure out exactly what height they're supposed to be, and you can raise this up. And as you can see there, as I raise it up, it gets more and more close to the particle spawner. So let's zero that back out. And then we have our bounce factor down here, like I mentioned, which is 0.5. If I bring this up, let's just say 5, then you'll see that they bounce rather crazily. Let's just make it like 1, and it bounces even more. If I make it 0.2, then it barely bounces at all. So on and so forth. And finally, you have Orbit Attractor, and this doesn't come ticked by default usually, but as you can see, it doesn't do anything when I turn it on. So this actually requires a couple more steps if you want to orbit Attractor. So let's go back to this section here when we actually, it's not in our particle editor, it's when you select the keyframe for the particle creator. When you expand this section here, you get spawn particles. If I turn that off, then you'll see no more particles. And I think this would allow you to keyframe when your particles spawn if you want to, things like that. And you have Attractor. So let's spawn in, let's just say a block. It can be pretty much anything, but we'll just spawn this block in and we'll move it over there. And let's move it up, move it up a little bit. And what we're gonna do is when we select this and we come over here and we have Attractor. So when I click on this, you'll see that we have pretty much all the objects that we would have in our library. And since we spawned in that grass block, we're gonna click that. And that gives us the grass block as our attractor. As you can see, it makes it so that our dang old particles are trying to go over to it based on some of the other parameters that we have as well. And then you have the force. You can reduce it so that they sort of go towards it less, and you can increase it so they really go towards it. And for the sake of this tutorial, let's make it go 2.5, and let's bring back our particle editor. So I'm going to go back to our fire particle, and as you can see down here, we have Orbit Attractor. And all that's going to do is just make sure that the particles do what we've told them to do, which is orbit the attractor. And if I actually, let's bring this back over, let's turn this off and this one off. And as you can see, the particles are going into the attractor and kind of going crazy. Let's actually turn our scaling off as well. Let's make that 0. And see what that does. There we go. Now they're not disappearing into infinity. So as you can see there, our particles are now like going in and looping and going just generally crazy. And let's see here. Let's turn that back on so we don't have so many particles on screen. Anyway, so that's basically what that would be. And if I go back into this and we can turn the force back down, let's just default it out. And, all these things can be played with to get the desired effect that you want. Anyway, so let's look into something a little bit different, though. What if we want something a little bit more tame than that? What if we don't want to deal with these sprites, as they're called, like with the item sheet for the textures that you can use for your particles? I'm beginning to lose my train of thought. So what if we want to use something a little more robust? What if we want to use something a little more 3D, you might say? Well, let's actually turn this number down a little bit because I don't trust that Mine-imator is going to be happy about this change. But what we're going to do is go to the kind here, and we're going to click on that. And as you can see, you have compatible blocks that are in your library here, and you can select those. So if I click on this, what we get is the dirt particles. And they're kind of piling up there. So if I move this, let's see what we can get them to do. Do like so. So it's going to kind of go out and go around. And as you can see, the particles, even the ones that have already spawned, are still following the dirt here. And that's kind of a cool effect. You can have that animate over time and whatnot and have something moving around with particles following it. Pretty cool. But as you can see, we can actually have 3D blocks become our particles instead of just using the particle sheet. Alrighty guys, I think that pretty much covers how you would edit and make your own custom particle effects. Let's turn this down. It's kind of slowing me down a little bit right now. Basically, those are all the things that you would adjust and all the things that you can do. You can have 3D particles, you can have all these things. So one thing I didn't mention was that you can actually remove some of these, obviously. You can add new ones, you can duplicate them, you can delete them, just like anything else in the timeline or the library. All those principles still apply. So let's just say, for whatever reason, this is the one that I want to keep. I'm like, yeah, this is the best particle ever. So all I got to do is go up to the top here and click on the save icon. And then this dialog comes up, and Mine-imator has its own little particle folder already, which is where all the default presets come in, and you can just name it and save it as whatever you want it to be. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this one Poopy Particle. So I'm going to save that, and what I can do now when I go to spawn in a new particle system, there it is. Poopy Particle is right there. And all I have to do is create it, and it'll just be the exact same thing that I made there. And that's how you can create your own particle effects, save them, and then use them in future projects. Alright guys, this tutorial was pretty clunky. I'm not really the best with particles, so I apologize for that, but I really hope it was somewhat helpful to some of you, and you can get some use out of this. So with that, that's going to be the end of this tutorial. So thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Hope it helped in some way. If it did, and if you did, feel free to hit that like button. Comment and subscribe to become a citizen today. If you want to support me more directly, then the Patreon link is in the description below. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.